All right, so today we're going to talk about normal maps, all right? Bump maps, normal maps, displacement maps, the differences between them, and how they're going to apply to your creations. We might not actually get to use them in the sense of like you guys aren't going to probably be baking high poly, low poly characters. That's more of a 3D modeling and rendering class that I do teach, but you will have to deal with it when it comes to alphas, when you're using Z add, Z sub, right? Those displacement, the brushes that push and pull the mesh, right? Those are adding displacement and height information to your model. They're physically actually displacing and moving the geometry, and it's not fake. So I want to kind of give you guys a framework to wrap your head around for normal maps, bump maps, and all that stuff, so that you guys, when you guys see it in the future, you know what you're doing, you know the differences, and you can apply it to your work in the best way possible. All right. Okay, so let us begin the show of slides. All right. So if just looking at this model, this is a gray model. This is like a low poly model. This is the normal map applied to the model. And then what you see on the edge of this barrel is the normal map with the textures applied, right? What normal maps essentially do is it allows us to fake information. It fakes detail, right? Using lighting information. We've talked about lights and how lights affect everything, how it averages lights, and it uses those lights to bake information from a high poly model to a low poly model. All right. So bump, normal, and displacement maps eliminate texture confusion. All right. There's a lot of stuff that's going on under the hood, and I want you guys to be able to understand and have a framework for what's going on. It took me a while to understand the difference between bump maps, normal maps, displacement maps, but when I saw them and used them in work, it helped me understand the concept a lot better. And to grasp that concept is to understand the type of information that you're going to be able to use and how to proceed with whatever you're modeling. All right. And you'll then be able to make educated decisions on how you're going to create your models. Are you going to do your normal maps? Are you going to do all of the information inside of ZBrush? And then in the texture phase, let the normal map be carried to the low poly? Or are you going to leave more of your model bare and then do a lot of the detailing in another package like Substance Painter, Marmoset? I don't know if there's another one, but it crosses my mind now. But yeah. All right. So the road to mastering textures. Many artists who are new to texturing or 3D in general experience confusion when encountering bump, normal, and displacement maps for the first time. They all seem to do sort of the same thing, right? The answer to that question is a resounding sort of. They all sort of do the same thing. Each one of these three types of maps creates something that looks like additional resolution or detail on the surface of geometry. Some of this detail is real and some of it isn't. In this article, we will dive into each of these three maps and learn what each map does and what they don't. You also have a better grasp on the strengths and weaknesses of each type of map. All right. Whoops, I went too far. So bump maps are the base. This is like the oldest school one of all of them. This is the one that was created first, right? Think of this as like Unk, right? Like, you know how kids say Unk these days? This is Unk right here. You know, bump maps are Unk. That's how I classify it. Bump maps create the illusion of depth and texture on the surface of a 3D model using computer graphics. Textures are artificially created on the surface of objects using grayscale and simple lighting tricks, rather than having to manually create individual bumps and cracks. All right? So the bump map is not real, right? You know how that lady on the air, it's not real. This is not real. This is essentially what bump maps are. It's not real information. It's using grayscale information, right? The darker the information, the more it's being pushed down. The lighter the gray or the to white, the more that information is being pushed up, right? So it's kind of like 0 to 1, and then the in-betweens of them is the grayscale. All right, so a bump map is actually one of the older types of maps we'll look at today. Like I said, that's UNC, right? The first thing you should understand about bump maps is that the detail they create is fake. No additional resolution is added to the model. As a result of a bump map, typically bump maps are grayscale images that are limited to 8 bits of color information. All right, so you can see the grayscale information. The white is going to be protruding out, and the dark is going to be receding in. All right, so that's only about 256 different colors of black, gray, or white. These values in a bump map are used to tell the 3D software basically two things: up or down. When values in a bump map are close to about 50% gray, that means there's little to no detail. So if it's like 50% gray, it's like you would think about it as halfway. Then if you go black, you're going down. If you're going white, you're going up. All right? When values in a bump map are close to 50, there's little to no detail that comes through on the surface. When values get brighter, working their way to white, the details appear to pull out of the surface. All right. So to contrast that, when values get darker and closer to black, they appear to be pushing into the surface. I told you guys. So like the darker, it's pushing into the surface, and bump maps are really great for creating tiny details on models. For example, pores or wrinkles on skin. They are also relatively easy to create and edit in a 2D application like Photoshop, considering you're just using grayscale values, right? If you're just using gray, black and white information like that, it's not, you're not dealing with color or anything like that. It's easy to make these guys happen. All right? So the problem, however, is when you deal with bump maps, they break pretty easily if the camera view is from the wrong angle. Since the detail they create is fake and not real resolution being added, the silhouette of the geometry that the bump map is applied to will always be unaffected by the map, right? If you look at the silhouette, right, we don't see any bumps here, right? We don't see the bumps that you would see on the model. The reason is because, well, the information isn't pushing or pulling that geometry in for real. It's fake. It's a trick, right? This is it's like movie magic, right? It's not really doing anything to the surface of our actual model. It's just telling it's just telling the camera, it's just telling the program, hey, this is supposed to look like it's up and this is supposed to look like it's down. But that's only based on the camera angle, and it's never gonna affect the silhouette of our surface. If it affected the silhouette, you would see that there would be peaks and valleys all up and down this bad boy. But it only happens where our camera is facing. All right, so you can see that even when you bump it up, you're still not getting any of that here. All right, we're not getting any of that information there. So this is the model for how normal maps work. When I showed you guys, I want to say a week or two ago, how light affects our surfaces and how light affects different mediums when it comes to texturing. However, when it comes to modeling, there's a process called the high poly, low poly baking, right? And what that does is, if we create a model in ZBrush, this model is usually very high in poly count. What that means is there's a lot of geometry, and there's a lot of, like, if you're going into a game, movie, there's still a lot of engines that can't handle millions and millions of polys for one character. So what we do as artists is we create a lower version of that character without all the bells and whistles. So we're not, it might not have the roughness or the skin pores or anything like that on it. And then we'll take the higher resolution mesh, we'll bring that into a package, and what we'll do is we'll bake the information from that high poly, and then we'll put that information via normal map, bump maps, or whatever onto the low poly mesh. So normal maps can be referred to as a newer, better type of bump map. It's the new kid on the block, right? As with bump maps, the first thing you need to understand about normal maps is that the detail they create is also fake. Fake it in a $3 bill, right? There's no additional resolution added to the geometry in your scene. In the end, a normal map does create the illusion of depth, right, on the surface of the model, but it does it differently than a bump map. It's not using grayscale anymore. Now it's using an RGB value of different hues of purples, greens, and pinks and things like that, right? And that's how you get the information. So if you just look at these models right here, this is our high poly resolution model, right? This model has been taken into ZBrush. You have done all the hard work. You've sculpted the pores, you've sculpted the birthmark, the details, all of it is in there. But what you're gonna realize is, man, in Unreal or in whatever software we're using, you can't bring this into that model, into that engine, without running really slow and having problems. So the workaround for artists is we're going to create a much lower resolution version of this guy, right? And then we will take this information from this guy and put it on this guy. And that's all these wrinkles, these moles, the curves of the head, right? And the reason you can tell this is if you look at this model, you can see what I call them geometry hits. You can see the facets that is made up of this geometry, right? You can see how this guy is completely smooth, rounded around. And this guy is faceted because we've got less information. We've got less geometry. So what we're doing is we're taking this, and the process is called baking. And you're going to bake that information onto a normal map, and then that normal map is then applied to our model, and then our model will look like the detailed original version. Well, but a trained eye, right? You guys, if you look at older games, you can see, I call them, like I said, geometry hits. You can see where the geo is. Our job as artists, right, is we want to do such a good job on our low poly model that you can't tell the difference between the high poly and low poly, right? If I wanted to tell this person or this student or this professional, right, hey, what you want to do is you're going to want to steal some geometry from here, right, from the neck area, and then put it here. So I would maybe put a point here, point there, point there, point there, point there, point there. And what that will do essentially is it'll round this out a little more. It still won't be this smooth, but it will give us a smoother transition between this silhouette, right? So that's part of the back and forth that you will go through when it comes to normal maps, all right? And as we already know, a bump map uses grayscale values to provide either up or down information. A normal map uses RGB information, right, that corresponds directly with the X, Y, and Z axis in three-dimensional space. This RGB information tells the 3D application that the exact direction of the surface normals are oriented in for each and every polygon. All right. So let's go back to this model, right? What we're going to do is when we bounce light, and like with the software, when you're baking your information, what the software is going to do is it's going to shoot out light, a bunch of photons. It's going to shoot out a bunch of light. And if this is our high poly surface, right? This is our high poly surface. It's going to bounce this light off right here. Boom, return the information. Bounce that light off right here. Boom, return that information. Bounce it off right here. So it's giving us the X, Y, and Z dimensions of this high poly model. And then it's going to bring back an average of that. So if the average of this is this right here, it's going to send that back as the normal. Boom, the average of this is boom, send back that. The average of this is this, boom, send that back. Right? So it's averaging that information and then sending that information back as X, Y, and Z coordinates. And those X, Y, and Z coordinates will all correspond with a different hue, a different RGB value. And those RGB values will then tell the computer, hey, this is what he's trying to do, right? So you'll get left, right, up, down, and you can see how the crevices and different things look. And you can see how much more complex and how much more information we can pack into this 256-bit depth of information, right? Rather than the 8 bits of information, we're getting 16 bits, 32 bits of information in our RGB values, because we can allow more bits of information, more RGB values can be stored in that map. All right. So the orientation of the surface normals, often just referred to as normals, tell the 3D application how the polygon should be shaded. In learning about normal maps, you should know that there are 3 totally different types. These 3 types look completely different when viewed in 2D space. The most commonly used is called tangent space normal maps and is a mixture of primarily purples and blues, right? So these are tangent space normal maps. And sometimes, depending on if your software uses X or Y for up, right? Depending on what your software uses, you might need to flip that your normal map, right? To get it to look like what's protruding is protruding and what's being inset is inset. All right. So there are 3 types of normal maps that all achieve the same effect, but they are calculated slightly differently, right? There's tangent space normals, there's object space normal, and then there's world space normals. They all achieve the same thing, but they all do it in different manners. All right. So let's talk about tangent space first. As the name implies, tangent space normals are based on the tangent direction of each face. These maps are always made up of a combination of 3 colors. Blue shows what has a slope in the normal, right? Red shows what has a slope in the left and right tangent direction. Green shows what has an up and down slope in the tangent direction. OpenGL normal maps have the green slope up, while DirectX maps have the green slope down. So depending on if you're going into, like I said, OpenGL or DirectX, you might have to flip your green channel, right? These are things that you will learn working with normal maps. Is you'll be like, man, why does my normal map look funky? Why does, this is supposed to be protruding, this is supposed to be showing up, this is supposed to be, showing up, why is it showing up weird? Well, you might need to go in and flip your green channel, all right? So object space normals. When we talk about object space, they are based on the entire object instead of each face individually. This is slightly faster for a graphics card to compute, but it does have some drawbacks. Since the right side will be a different color than the left side, no UVs can be mirrored, meaning that a lot of texture space will be wasted on symmetrical models. This also means that if the object twists around, the shading will appear flipped. And this is a problem because like I said, a lot of our job is efficiency, right? You know, we're the Doge of artists, right? We're the Doge. We have to focus on what's the most efficient, what's the best use of our texture space, what's the best use of our UV islands, our UV space. The reason is because if I have a character that has backpack, weapon, accessories, clothing, maybe he has, a vehicle of some sort, and I'm going into a game and the director says, "Hey, we have a budget of, maybe 5,000 for the character, and then 5,000 for all his accessories." Right? You're gonna have to focus on first the budget for the character. So then you've got to break down your character to where the mesh looks really good at 5,000. The accessories, all of them equal 5,000. And then now you have to worry about how you orient your texture space, right? Instead of unmasking the entire character, flattening it and putting it, if you're using tangent space normal, right, you can split your model right in half, right? Just split it in half, put half of it on there, the texture wise, and then in the engine, use that same one, flip it, and it'll do the same thing. It'll look correct. It'll be right the whole time. But with object space, you can't do that. So you're now having to waste it because it doesn't allow you to do symmetrical UV layouts. It doesn't allow you to use the efficiency of using symmetrical models. Because like what will happen sometimes is you'll just cut the face in half, you'll mirror the texture, boom, you're good to go. Right? You can say, all right, use the same one for this side. It's gonna look right. It's gonna look good, right? It wouldn't work if your model is asymmetrical anyway, right? You can use it for that, but when you're trying to use your UV space, your texture space efficiently, you're gonna want to stick with something that allows you to do those symmetrical texturing techniques. So when we go to the final, which is world space normals, they are at the least flexible of all since they are based on the global coordinates. Usually you use this for like maps, like giant maps will use world space normal maps, right? They're very stationary. They're not moving anywhere, right? If I'm doing like a giant swatch of land or a level, right? These rocks ain't going nowhere. This building, this archway isn't going anywhere. I can use it for that. So this type of normal is only used on large, static, and asymmetrical objects like environments. All right, yeah, I was going to get to that. Or used temporarily in programs like Substance Painter as a means to calculate weathering effects. All right, so that's another use for it is you can use it to do an overall kind of map. And then if you're going to add like rain or grease or dust or something like that, right? Those kind of things don't need to be symmetrical, and you can use world space normals for that. All right. So remember, there's tangent space, there's object space, and then there is world space. All right. Does anybody know which one is tangent space? This one or this one? Does anybody know what this one is? Versus this one. If anybody knows, you can unmute your mic and let me know. This presentation, I usually do it in class. So like I'm usually like picking on you guys. But I can't pick on you because I can't see you right now. So if anybody... let me see.
The left one is the tangent one.
You saying this one or this one?
The left one.
This one is tangent?
Yeah.
Actually, it is this one. This is tangent space.
Oh.
Yeah, this is tangent space. This one is the purples and blues, right? This one is more of a world space map.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So like what you can see is with things like this that are, if it's going to be a statue or static, right? They have more color information to it. And what can help you is to know the differences. Think of it like tangent is per face, and it's going to contain purples and blues, right? And then world space and object space will involve more reds, greens, and different things like that, because this is going to determine left and right, and then this will determine up and down. So that's a good way to know the difference. So these maps work best for meshes that have to deform during animation. Tangent space normal maps are great for things like characters. For assets that don't deform, oftentimes an object space normal is used. These maps have a rainbow assortment of different colors, as well as slightly improved performance over tangent space, right? So if this guy has to be animated, has to move around, well, you're going to want to use tangent space because our animations, because it's, like I said, per poly, right? That's how it's affecting our model. However, when it comes to something that's going to be non-moving, so now imagine this character is a statue, right? Well, then you're going to want to use an object space normal because, well, we got left and right, and it's going to usually perform better because it's not having to calculate it per poly. All right. So without normal maps, if you look at the base of our character, right, this is what it would look like. This is Samus. And she is from, is it Metroid? I want to say it's Metroid.
It is Metroid.
It's Metroid. Okay, cool. I was like, I haven't played this game in so long. All right, but this is Samus. She is a character from it. Okay, here's one of the things. This is like a little tidbit. For the longest time, when we were growing up, nobody knew Samus was a female character. Now looking at the silhouette, I don't know why we didn't know, but I think we were pretty dumb. But like, yeah, we didn't know, and then it was like revealed in like the late 2000s that, yeah, this is like a female character. We were like, oh my god, mind blown, the coolest character ever, you know. So yeah, this is a very interesting character. But now let's look at the normal maps. So what they've done is they've taken the high poly information from the high poly character and then baked those down into this normal map. And then that normal map is then applied to our base model, our low poly geometry. And then it fakes all of this panel work that she's got here, these ridge in the padding for the legs, all this extra information is then applied, right? So there are definitely some things you need to be aware of when considering using a normal map. Unlike a bump map, these types of maps can be very difficult to create or edit in a 2D software like Photoshop. It took us a while, but like you can do it. You can edit these a little easier now. It took a while to understand what was going on because like when normal maps were first introduced, Photoshop isn't what Photoshop is today. Now Photoshop has like a normal map filter that you can even use to generate a lot of this information. But what we would do is we would grab, like, if I had like a model like this, eventually what happened is people would start creating normal map packs of like bolts and nuts. So I could grab like a normal mapped bolt, I could throw it on, as extra pieces or something. Like if I had like a screw that I wanted to put on one of these, I'd grab an extra one, throw it on there. The problem with it being used back in the day is the computer didn't have a good way of analyzing, all right, well, you're saying that this is kind of round and pushed down. How is this, you adding this extra information, this extra detail gonna affect that? Is this now up, down, left, So that was the problem. But nowadays it's so much easier to edit normal maps. You can edit it in Substance Painter, Photoshop. Substance Painter and Photoshop have they're integrated pretty much. Because they're owned by the same company at this point. They weren't at one point in time. When I first started using Substance Painter, it was owned by a company named Allegorithmic, I think is the name of the company. It's been so long. But then they got bought out by Adobe, and now they've tried to integrate it. Some people will say it's good. Some people will say it's horrible and should have never happened and it's an abomination. I'm not one of those people, but yeah, it happened. And now it's like you can buy it as part of the bundle for Adobe Creative Suite. So likely you will bake a normal map out using a high resolution version of your mesh. There are, however, some exceptions for editing these types of maps, which is what I just talked about. It's like, yeah, it's gotten a lot easier to kind of edit your normals in different programs. All right. So Mari, okay, that's what I was thinking. Mari, for example, has the ability to paint the type of surface normal information we see in a normal map. When it comes to support, normal maps are pretty well integrated into most pipelines. Unlike a bump map, there are exceptions to this rule though. One of those would be mobile games. Only recently has hardware evolved to the point where mobile games are beginning to adopt normal mapping into their pipeline. And that's what I talked about. I was like, some games, some mobile games are still using 512 by 512, right? The map is like this big. You got to stuff everything in there, and you have to be really good at packing your maps. Like that is a skill, right? Where learning how to pack your normal maps, learning how to pack your texture space is art, right? Like you can look it up in different places of how people just, the most intricate looking character, you're like, that's a 1024 by 1024, that's a 512 by, that's beautiful, right? These guys have mastered that workflow. All right. So now let's talk about displacement maps. Displacement maps are very interesting, are the most interesting of the bunch, because when it comes to creating additional detail for your low resolution meshes, displacement maps are king. I will say that they will cost you the most though, right? These types of maps physically displace, as the name implies, the mesh to which they are applied. In order for detail to be created based on displacement maps, usually the mesh must be subdivided or tessellated so real geometry is created, right? When you add a displacement map, sometimes called height maps, right? Those terms nowadays are being used interchangeably, right? If somebody says displacement height map, they're usually talking about one thing. And displacements are a grayscale value, up white, the darker hues are getting embedded into the surface. So the great thing about displacement map is that they can actually be either baked from a high resolution model or painted by hand. Like a bump map, a displacement consists of grayscale values. Here's the real kicker though. While you can use an 8-bit displacement map, you will almost always experience better results using 16 or 32-bit displacement maps, because you can just, the range that you can get in 8 bits is like 256. But between 16 and 32, I mean, it's exponential how much it goes from 16-bit to 32-bit. And the range that you can get in there is so much wider, right? The gradation from like white to less white to even less white to even, to from gray to light gray to dark gray. The gradations can be so much smaller and so much more precise in 62-bit and 32-bit maps that you're just going to get much better information, much better results using it. And with 8-bit, you can start to get this weird stair-stepping kind of thing that happens in your normal maps and height maps that will get smoothed out because you have so much more information. The transition is so much more between the 16 and the 32-bit. All right. So while 8-bit files may look good in 2D space, when brought into 3D, they can sometimes cause banding and other artifacts, the stair-stepping, that's what I'm talking about, as a result of the insufficient range in value. Now here's the not so great thing about displacement maps. And here's the, creating all that additional geometry in real time is extremely difficult. It's gotten easier, right? It's gotten easier over time because our computer hardwares have gotten a lot better, right? The real time is extremely difficult and hard on your system. Because of this, most 3D applications calculate final displacement results at render time. What that's saying is most render engines will do all of the calculations, the diffuse, specular, gloss, all of those information when it's rendering your image or something. It'll do all of that, and then at the last time, the last little information it's going to process is the displacement map information or the height map information. I know that's true for Arnold, and then I know that's true for V-Ray, right? If you've ever used V-Ray as a renderer, if you've ever used Arnold as a renderer, you guys might have used V-Ray. V-Ray is industry standard when it comes to like rendering. I've used it in a lot of production houses. They use it for, it renders glass, liquids really, really, really well. Gives you really good reflections, really good real world lighting and things like that. Arnold is like the little bro who does almost as good a job, a little faster, but industry still, for some reason, they are married to V-Ray and what it can do. I might pull up some of what V-Ray stuff looks like, just so you guys can see. Arnold's coming up though. They're, Maxon and ZBrush, they have Redshift. That's their version of their render engines. All right. So in comparison to bump or normal maps, a displacement map will also add significant time to your renders. As a result, this additional geometry, it's hard to beat the results of a displacement, because what it's doing is it's actually moving the geometry. It's not like I'm trying to fake it with a bump. I'm not trying to fake it with a normal map. It's there, right? If you printed out a map with a model with a normal, it would be smooth. If you print it out with a bump, it'll be smooth because it didn't do anything to the geometry. But if you printed a model with the displacement on, it will actually have those bumps and those crevices in there because it's actually moving the geometry. All right. Since the geometry is actually modified, the silhouette reflects the additional geometry. You should always weigh the expense of a displacement map against the added benefit before deciding to use it. Nowadays, though, like I said, because of the hardware that we have, it's getting much more easy to use and justify using displacement maps in your model. I know Unreal Engine, they handle that shit like a boss. Like, they handle it really friggin' easily nowadays. So displacement maps aren't even that crazy to use. And it's almost like standard to use height maps, displacement map. And I'm using them interchangeably so that you guys can get used to hearing that they are interchangeable nowadays. Height map, when somebody says height map, think displacement. Think that it's actually going to affect your geometry, right? Think that it's going to actually break the silhouette of your geometry. All right. So here is a displacement map applied to a model. You can see the edge, right? The edge has that, right? It has those breaks of this concrete, right? Because it's actually pushing and pulling the information. However, a normal map does not do that. A normal map will not break the silhouette because, like I said, it's based on your camera angle and it's based on fake geometry. We're faking this information, right? The maps look different, right? This almost looks closer to a bump map, but if you put it in where it says height or displacement, it's going to do that, which is push when it comes to black, pull when it comes to white and lighter values. All right. So in some cases, it may be possible for you to combine either a bump or a normal map with a displacement map on the same asset. Nowadays, for most assets, you're probably going to combine all three of them, right? You're probably going to use a little combination of all of those. The best way to do this would be to utilize displacement for the big changes to the geometry and then the normal or bump map for finer details. Regardless of which map you choose to use, understanding how each map works and both its strengths and as well as its weaknesses will only make your decisions easier. Ultimately, the map you go with should be the one that best fits the needs of the scenario you find yourself dealing with. All right, what that means is if I'm making anime characters, the chances that I'm going to need to use displacement maps are very little. The chances that I'm going to need to use normal maps are very little. I might use some bump maps, but a lot of the times these anime characters, they're painted, right? So they're hand-painted, handcrafted textures that don't even use any of that, right? But if I'm making a Call of Duty, oh, best believe I'm digging into my displacement bag. I'm digging into my normal map bag. I'm dipping into my bump bag. Like I'm dipping into those because if I'm gonna make a backpack or something, well, there's a little exercise I like to do is like when you think about how characters are, right? There's an order or a LOD, level of detail of information that I use, right? Depending on the game, if it's first person, right? What you're going to be seeing is, if it's a first person game, you're going to be seeing the weapon, right? So what you're going to be seeing is this right here. All of this right here. Imagine this is my weapon, right? So I don't want to use like a bump map on something like this. I might want to use displacement because the camera is going to be right here, right? I'm going down the hall, I'm going down, right? And your eye as the customer, the player, right? You're going to be looking at this gun all the time. This is your tool. This is your main character, right? Think about it that way. This is your main character right here. So I'm going to put all the detail right in this area right here. So I'm going to displace this little bad boy, these little ridges. I'm going to displace this line. It's going to be probably displaced. But the further I fall away, right? If you look down and you see your boots, that might be a bump map. That might be a normal map, right? Because it's not close to the camera. But now if we're dealing with a game like a third-person shooter or something like that, well, the character on screen might be this big, right? It might be this big. You're playing like this. You're surrounded by environments. So using a displacement map would be absolutely wasteful. It would be useless to use a displacement map because, you know, you might be modeling and you looking at it like this. This is how you modeling it like this. But then you put it in game, that sucker done turned into something this big, right? And the end result always has to justify the way you're modeling your characters, the way you're putting information into your characters. Because if I went in and I'm doing micro surface detail and I'm putting all that shit in for something that's going to be this big on camera, well, you should fire me right then and there because I'm misusing resources. I'm misusing assets. I'm telling you this, even if the engine you're using can handle it, you're still misusing the resources that you have at hand because that is not what that project calls for, right? That is malpractice, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to think through what you're about to do. Think of the end result, right? If I'm dealing with, all right, this is what I'm doing. It's a FPS, right? I'm seeing my hands, I'm seeing my arms the whole time. Well, the detail, right? I'm gonna put some displacement here. I'm gonna put some displacement here, right? But if it's a top-down tabletop shooter or something like a MOBA, well, you putting surface detail into the hands is pretty useless, isn't it? You know? So these are the kind of things that I want you guys to think about. These are the kind of things that when you're going into the future, when you're going into your work, when you're going into the workplace, these are the types of things that will make, and because then they'll be doing the work. Everybody's trying to calculate stuff like, damn, this thing is mad heavy. This thing is running mad slow. Why is it running mad slow? Not knowing homie done put 4K into the hands of the character, the feet of the character, accessories that are like this big. Like, you know, you made a sword that, you know, in ZBrush, that thing looks sweet. It's big, it's nice and shiny. But then you fighting with characters this big. All right? So these are the kind of things that you guys need to think about. And it's going to help you guys make educated decisions when it comes to the models that you're making, when it comes to the things that you guys are trying to put out there. These are the types of things that will definitely give you guys a leg up in the industry. All right. So that's pretty much the lecture. Does anybody have any question about normal maps or anything like that I've talked about today? Is anything unclear? Or do you guys think you kind of have a basic understanding of it? All right, I'll take that as you guys understand it a little bit. So I want to just show you guys a little bit of, like, you know, what I talk about when I'm saying V-Ray. And then there's Arnold, and then there's also Redshift. Well, there's also Keyshot as well. So like the renderers are getting much better, much faster these days. Maxon is a GPU renderer that's pretty cool. So Maxon is let me see. Maxon makes, they don't make ZBrush, but they've bought ZBrush out. And ZBrush used to be owned by Pixelogic, and now, like, you know, it's like Pinger, right? So they do lighting like this. So then you get V-Ray. There's also Rhino. I forget, man. There's so many renderers out now that, like, you are just, you know, and you'll get different looks from different renderers. And that's what you'll notice is, like, you'll get, but they're starting to, like, it's almost like a pick your poison, pick the one you want to learn. Or, you know, depending on, you know, because you might go to a company and all they use is V-Ray, right? So you got to learn the V-Ray, you know, how they calculate light, how they calculate materials, the maps that they export out, right? So that's pretty, you know, that's really what you guys are going to have to deal with in, so this is Arnold. So this is the Arnold renderer, you know, and they all do different things, and they're all good in their own right. Arnold can be used. This is like a movie. I've seen V-Ray, people use it to composite like real life stuff into it. When I worked at this company called Sector 5, we used it to composite like our CEO into this futuristic helicopter that Bell was creating at the time, and we used it to to composite like real world into like this CG world. So like a lot of these, they're starting to bridge the gap, and a lot of movies that you see, they use a lot of these engines, like they, you know, interchangeably. And you know, it's what's really bridging the gap for CG and real life, right? When it's hard to tell, you know, they're using sometimes it's like a proprietary engine that, you know, we don't even have, you know. I know the guys at Lucasfilms, ILM, they have their own, like they have their own thing that they do. Their render engine is like proprietary to them. You can't even license it. You're not finna get it. right? Don't even ask. That's how they look at it. This is ours. Don't touch it. I know Pixar has their own. Disney has their own engine. I think Disney probably runs off the framework of ILM, but because I think they own ILM. The guys who make Star Wars, I think they use ILM as well. So render engines, we're not going to get into it because they're proliferating at this point. There's so many of them that when you get into the job, like, you might want to learn one for yourself, but when you get into the job, like, just everybody uses kind of different render engines. Like the last company I worked for, they used man, this is terrible that I can't remember it. Oh my god, what's this program called? It's not Twinmotion, but it's something else. But it's one of those engines that it's good for architecture. It's really, really good for architecture. Let me see if I can find it. Architecture render. Lumion. That's what it's called. Lumion. It's called Lumion. So like they use Lumion. It's like it's ridiculous how fast Lumion is when it comes to rendering stuff. But it's not going to be the most realistic engine you're going to get. Then Unreal Engine, right? The guys who make Unreal Engine, Epic Games, they created their own version of Lumion, which is called Twinmotion. Twinmotion runs off of the Unreal Engine framework, so you're going to get a little better rendering, but it doesn't have the most robust features when it comes to there's the library and the database that Lumion has. So like there's drawbacks, there's give and takes, there's ebbs and flows to every one of these, and there's the things that they do well, that there's the things that they might not do well. Some might do subsurface scattering really well. Some might do reflections really well. Some might do just the render speed really well, right? Some might have a GPU based renderer. Some might be CPU based, right? So what you're gonna see is that you're gonna get into the industry, and the company is going to say, all right, this is our framework. This is what we do. This is what, and they'll try to onboard you on that software. Hopefully you know it. Like, hopefully you've done your research before you go into the company and go, hey, I know you guys use this. I've practiced it a little bit. I know how to use it. You downloaded a free, trial, learn the little, a little bit about it. So you're not going into it just raw. But for the most part, render engines are a dime a dozen at this point, and everybody's just trying to outcompete each other for who's got the best one. So if you guys don't have any questions for me, that is it for today's class. Tomorrow we'll do more practical. I'll show you guys how I would create like alpha brushes. I'll even give you guys some of my alphas. I have like a bunch of free ones that I've created over the years that I use to create different things, like maybe some wood pattern, nails, things like that, like skin, pores. I'll make those available for you guys to use, and you guys can practice those as well. All right. It is your boy Ty. This is character sculpting, and the lecture is over.